To begin, have the athlete start off on all fours with the hands underneath the shoulders and the knees underneath the hips. The cat movement is very simple for most. Lift the head and chest simultaneously while letting the stomach sink. In this position, you'll have a nice arch in your lower back. To perform the camel, you're going to do the exact opposite. Try it around the back from top to bottom, letting the head and neck drop and trying to get the head and buttocks as close together as possible. This movement is not a stretch, so don't force the end range of motion. Instead, think of gently moving back and forth between the two movements. The most common issues you'll see with this movement are bending of the elbows to achieve the range of motion and/or lateral shifting of the body. The arms should be kept straight throughout, and the only movement should be around the back, on the hips. Lay on your back with your legs straight and arms straight out to the side. Then take one ankle and cross it over the other. From the starting position, twist from the hips in a side-to-side fashion. Just like the cat-camel, don't focus on forcing the range of motion, but rather on fluid movement from side to side. After performing the necessary repetitions, switch the ankles so that the opposite leg is on top and repeat. The yoga twist is a fairly simple movement, so the only errors you'll probably encounter are people who struggle with initiating the movement at the hips or people who force the end range of motion. Begin by laying on your side with your head propped up by your hand, your torso and legs in line with each other, and the knees bent at a 90-degree angle. Your free hand should be placed on the floor in front of you to keep your torso from rotating too much. From here, you'll again think of initiating the movement from the hips and flipping the feet over. Just like the other spinal flossing movements, do not force the end range of motion, but rather gently move within a comfortable range. Perform the allotted number of repetitions, then switch sides. The biggest errors you'll see with the side twist are trouble starting the movement around the hips and excessive rotation of the torso if the free hand isn't placed in front. Lower back. Begin by laying flat on your back with the knees bent and the feet flat on the floor. With the feet and knees together, allow the knees to fall from side to side, getting a stretch in the lower back and upper hips. Like the spinal flossing movements, don't force the range of motion and gently work through a comfortable range of motion. The only error we typically see are athletes who do not keep their shoulders down. Start in an all-fours position with the knees underneath the hips and the hands underneath the shoulders. From the starting position, brace the stomach as if you were about to be punched. From here, squeeze one glute and press the heel back until the leg is straight. Simultaneously, reach forward completely with the opposite arm and then return to the starting position. Repeat as necessary, then perform the opposite side. While this exercise may seem very easy at first glance, it can be quite difficult when performed correctly. Make sure not to let the torso tip to one side and focus on pushing the legs straight back rather than allowing it to kick laterally. This lateral kicking would indicate an overactive tensor fasciae lata and iliotibial band attempting to take over the movement. Side imbalances. Lay on your left side with your arms outstretched and the left leg straight. Take the right leg and flex it at the hip and knee until you make a 90-degree angle, resting it on the ground. This is the starting position. From the starting position, take the right arm and reach back across the body until you get a stretch in the middle and lower back. Return to the starting position and repeat for the necessary number of repetitions. Make sure that the hip and knee are at 90-degree angles prior to initiating the movement and do not allow the down knee to come off the ground. This is an excellent movement to warm up this often injured area. Lay down in a push-up position and press your body up into a pike position where the hips are higher than the rest of your body. Take your left foot and place it behind your right ankle. From the starting position, keep the leg straight and press the heel of the right foot down to the ground until you get a stretch in the calves. Repeat for the necessary repetitions, then switch sides. This exercise can also be performed with the knee bent to put more emphasis on the soleus muscle rather than the gastrocnemius. Fire hydrants of the gluteal complex. From a starting position on your hands and knees, abduct the thigh on one side to lift it off the ground. As you reach the end of your abduction range of motion, extend the leg back completely and then return the leg to the starting position. When performed fluently, this movement will seem almost circular. Many individuals try to rush this movement and wind up missing out on full extension of the thigh. Make sure that you're getting enough abduction at the start as well.
For the supine bridge, start with your head, back, and butt flat on the floor and legs at 90 degrees. Squeeze your cheeks and go up just as high as your cheeks will take you. Don't use your low back and hamstrings. If it helps, think about trying to raise the back up one vertebrae at a time off the floor. On the negative, lower under control to a point just above the floor without touching, and then repeat as necessary. If you're having trouble keeping your hamstrings out of the movement, lightly touch your quads so that they activate a bit. That way, you won't be able to activate your hamstrings because they'll be reciprocally inhibited. Start with your head, back, and butt flat on the floor and legs at 90 degrees. Next, grab one leg and hug it to your chest. Squeeze the cheek of your down leg and go up just as high as your glute will take you. Don't use your low back and hamstrings. If it helps, think about trying to raise the back up one vertebrae at a time off the floor. On the negative, lower under control to a point just above the floor without touching, and then repeat as necessary. If you have trouble keeping your hamstrings out of the movement, have someone lightly touch your quads so that they activate a bit. That way, you won't be able to activate your hamstrings because they'll be reciprocally inhibited. Just like the double leg bridge, make sure not to go any higher than your glutes will take you. You'll also really want to squeeze the glutes hard at the top of the movement, and your head should not come off the floor throughout the course of the movement. Once you get the hang of it, you can do it freestanding. From a standing position, you're just going to flex and extend the thigh rhythmically as if you were a punter kicking a football. Make sure the motion occurs predominantly at the hips and not the lumbar spine. Many individuals will try to hyperextend at the lower back to compensate for a lack of range of motion and hip extension. Keep the chest out and shoulders back with the eyes looking straight ahead. When performing this version of the leg swing, it's important to make sure that the hips are where the swinging is occurring. Many individuals have tight hip flexors and will therefore have insufficient hip extension range of motion. As a result, their natural tendency will be to hyperextend at the lumbar spine. It's best to limit how far they can go rather than allow them to go too far in a faulty movement pattern. Be sure to avoid rounding of the upper back and shoulders as well. Keep the knees almost completely locked. If you bend them excessively, the hamstrings will never lengthen sufficiently to make this a productive drill. Initially, you'll want to hold on to something as you do this exercise. Once you get the hang of it, you can do it freestanding. From a standing position, you're just going to abduct and adduct the thigh rhythmically as a ballerina would as a warm-up. Make sure the motion occurs predominantly at the hips and not through side-to-side hip movement. Keep the chest out and shoulders back with the eyes looking straight ahead throughout. Most individuals are tight in their hip adductors, so watch out for lateral tilting of the torso to compensate for a lack of hip abduction range of motion. Be sure to avoid rounding of the shoulders and/or upper back as well. This movement loosens up these typically tight areas and promotes optimal movement. Lay on your back with the arms outstretched to the side and the legs straight. Keeping the legs straight throughout, take one leg up and across the body and touch the toes on the ground on the opposite side. As the athlete gets more flexible, encourage him or her to try and get the toes closer and closer to the opposite hand. Do not let the shoulders come up too far. This typically happens when the athlete tries to get the foot too close to the hand when he or she does not have adequate flexibility to do so. True stretch. Lie face down on the ground with the legs straight and together while the arms are extended to the side. Initiate the movement by squeezing the glute and swinging one leg back and over the opposite leg and your torso. Touch the toe to the ground and then return to the starting position. Really focus on keeping the shoulders down while performing this exercise. Remember that our primary goal here is to get our glute muscles firing better, not seeing how far we can wrench our spine to increase the range of motion. Nonetheless, once your dynamic flexibility comes around, you may very well be able to touch your foot to the opposite hand. This exercise emphasizes the smaller gluteus medius and minimus muscles rather than the larger gluteus maximus. Stand on one leg and drop the opposite hip out, and let the hip on the side that's balancing poke out. Hold for a second and then correct back to the starting position. One thing you want to make sure to do is keep your torso as level as possible. If your torso is all over the place, you're probably using your quadratus lumborum instead of your gluteus medius and minimus. This is definitely not a good practice, as most people have overactive QLs already. Finally, don't rotate the body while performing this exercise. The movement should be purely side to side. The feedback afforded by a mirror can be very helpful as you work to get the proper feeling of the movement. The most common errors we see with this movement are rotating as one drops and not keeping the torso level. Remember, this is a subtle movement. If you're moving all over the place, you're probably performing it incorrectly. Non-functional warm-ups. Set up with a wide stance and your torso upright. Rotate and flex at the hips, reaching with your right arm to your left foot. Rhythmically transition with rotation to the right side with your left arm. Keeping the chest and eyes up, all the bending over should be achieved with hip flexion, not lumbar flexion. Many individuals will stoop over and round at the upper and/or lower back to get to the down position. Instead, think of pushing the hips back to get into the start position. Keep your eyes up throughout the movement. If you look down, the posture at the upper and lower back is bound to fall apart. The first exercise on our list is the high knee walk. From the starting position, take a step forward and raise one knee. Grasp the knee with both hands and hug it, pulling it up and into your chest. As you are pulling the leg up and in, raise up on the opposite toe. Return to the starting position, then repeat with the opposite leg. When performing this exercise, make sure you are actively pulling the knee up and in. Also, focus on maintaining good posture and not getting too much forward lean. From the starting position, take a step forward and curl one leg up towards your buttock. Grasp the foot with the same side hand and pull it into your buttock. As you are pulling the leg in, lift up on the opposite toe. Return to the starting position and repeat with the opposite leg. Those who are really tight will try to lean forward excessively and/or abduct the leg to compensate for lack of hip extension range of motion. Be sure to stay completely upright and don't allow the leg to move too far laterally. It should kick straight backward and/or very close to it. Wrap a mini band around your legs just above the kneecaps or at the ankles. Keeping the toes pointed forward, walk sideways with only a slight bend in the knees. Avoid dragging the back foot and make sure the band remains taut throughout the duration of the movement. If it helps, you can actually put your hand on the same side hip to facilitate contraction of the gluteus medius and minimus. After performing the necessary repetitions, go back facing the same direction but leading with the opposite leg. Don't allow any slack in the band and be sure not to let the trailing foot drag. Ability is, you're about to find out. Take a step forward and then think about pulling the instep of your foot up to your groin. Use your hands to grab your foot and ankle to pull up and further facilitate the stretch. This exercise is tougher than it sounds. Be sure to be cognizant of proper posture as you go. Watch out for rounding of the shoulders and or upper back, and make sure that you're actively pulling the foot up instead of just at the shoulder or elbow joints. Set up as if you were going to do a push-up and then just allow your shoulder blades to retract without bending your elbows. You should drop about 2 inches towards the floor. To reverse the motion, protract the scapula until you're back in the starting position. This exercise activates and strengthens the serratus anterior, a muscle that is crucial in holding the scapula tight to the rib cage, thus preventing scapular winging. This muscle is generally the first to shut down whenever shoulder dysfunction is present. The two most common problems we see are bending of the elbows and allowing the hips to sag. If you don't have the strength to perform this movement in a regular push-up position, you can do it from your knees or standing with your hands on a wall. Around the shoulders. Grab a broomstick or PVC pipe with an extra wide grip. Starting with the bar in front of your hips, slowly raise the bar in an arc to a point where you get a good stretch in the front of your shoulders, pecs, and lats. Bringing it all the way around so that it's behind you at the level of your glutes. As you warm up, bring your grip in a little bit closer and continue to push the limits of your flexibility. Make sure that you don't bend your elbows or excessively arch the lower back. Stand tall and keep the arms straight throughout. Lift one arm out in front of you and actively kick your opposite foot up towards your hand. Remember, perfect posture here is crucial. Keep the chest up and tall throughout. You can do this in a walking or skipping fashion. This one will be challenging for those of you with tight hamstrings, so be sure to avoid rounding of the shoulders and or upper back, and considerable bending of the knee to make up for the lack of hip flexion range of motion. The legs should be straight and you should be upright throughout the movement. Begin by taking a step forward and placing the weight on the heel. Keep a slight bend in the knee of the support leg. Keeping excellent posture, chest high, scapula retracted, slightly arched lower back. Push your butt back to enable you to lower the torso down like you are performing a toe touch. Simultaneously, swing the opposite leg back as far as you can. You should try to touch the fingertips to the ground. Return to the starting position and repeat with the opposite leg. The backward version is the same exercise, just moving in the opposite direction. The same problems you'll see with a classic deadlift will emerge with this movement, so it is often very challenging to learn. Watch out for rounding of the upper and lower back, and make sure to avoid looking down as well. The eyes should be focused forward and slightly up. Go as deep as your flexibility allows, and don't rush through reps. Stand completely upright in between each step. Begin by dropping into a reverse lunge with the back knee just above the ground. From the lunge position, twist and reach back over the front leg. Finish up by driving off the front heel back to the starting position. For added variety, you can do these walking forward. The two most common problems we see are not getting deep enough and not taking long enough strides. Avoid these two pitfalls and keep your chest upright throughout the movement, and you'll be golden. To begin, stride out into an exaggerated forward lunge position. While in the lunge position, take the elbow on the same side as the forward leg and try to get it as close to the heel as possible. Now, stand up completely in between repetitions and repeat on the opposite side. Be careful to avoid rounding of the lower back. Given the nature of the movement, some subtle upper back rounding is okay, but don't let it get out of hand. Depth is important if you really want to get the adductors, so be sure to take long strides. Step directly to the side and sink into a lateral side lunge. The weight should be on the heel and the chest up. The key here is to improve hip mobility in the bent leg while improving flexibility in the adductors on the straight leg. Focus on keeping the toes pointed straight forward throughout. Get deep on these, and once you come up, rotate around and lead with the opposite leg. Don't round the shoulders or upper back. The chest should be up and out. Keep the heels on the floor as you sink into the squat. If you feel like they're coming up, limit your depth until your flexibility improves. It's acceptable to have your toes pointed slightly outward during this drill. It'll help those of you with tight hip flexors and calves to perform the movement correctly. The squat is arguably the greatest strength training exercise of all time. Unfortunately, most people don't have the flexibility to do it correctly. This movement is going to loosen up all those squatting muscles and give you the flexibility and mobility to squat deep. With a slightly wider than shoulder width stance, bend over and grab the bottom of your shoes. From here, pull yourself into a deep squat position. Key points to remember are chest up, knees out, and slight arch in the lower back. The goal is to get a little lower with better posture each repetition. Hold for a second or two in the hole before standing up and repeating. All the things that are important in a regular squat are important here. Most importantly, you want to keep ideal posture with the chest up and the back flat. Also, some are very tight around the ankles, so try not to let your heels rise up in the bottom position. Start with your feet shoulder width apart and your arms at your sides. Initiate the movement by striding backward and behind you with one leg as if you were taking a stage bow. With left leg support, your right leg should be reaching to 7 o'clock. With right leg support, your left leg should be reaching to 5 o'clock. Keep the front shin perpendicular to the floor. As you stride back, reach overhead. Push off the heel of the front foot to return to the starting position and repeat the movement on the opposite side. Make sure the torso remains upright the entire time. Make sure you don't stride too far laterally. If you do, you'll tip over. Posture is especially important here as well. Don't let the shoulders and upper back round. Run forward and kick our heels to our butt. This is one of those simple yet effective exercises as it works to dynamic. Make sure that you aren't leaning forward or allowing the leg to move to the side instead of just backward. Everyone should know how to skip from the time they're in grade school. Just exaggerate the movement in this case by really getting the knees up and emphasizing arm action. It's tough to skip incorrectly if you know how to do it, but specific to this movement, just make sure that you're getting the knees high enough and using your arms. The most common mistake we see with this movement is that athletes just get lazy and don't complete each rep properly. A deep, wide-out drop is a great progression into squatting or any movement that requires significant deceleration. From a standing position with your feet shoulder width apart, quickly but smoothly drop into a wider stance deep squat. Your feet should momentarily leave the ground before landing on the midfoot and sitting back into a deep squat. Keep your arms extended in front of you to assist in keeping the chest out and shoulders up. Focus on using the posterior chain to help the quadriceps cushion the drop. Pop back up to the shoulder width starting position by again momentarily leaving the ground. Keep the heels. Lay on your back and push your hips up in the air by activating your glutes. Raise one leg to a point where it is extended and perpendicular to the ground while holding yourself in the up position with the support leg. Lower the elevated leg directly to the side without letting the hips turn too far. As you reach the end range of motion, whip the leg back to the starting position by activating your adductors. Repeat for repetitions. The glutes should never touch the ground during performance of the exercise. This movement takes a bit of endurance, so be sure to avoid letting the hips drop as you lower the opposite leg. Excessive rotation at the lumbar and thoracic spine may also be a problem. Remember that this movement is supposed to occur almost exclusively at the junction of the hips.
As you recall, we noted earlier that there are a few static stretches that we do recommend for the warm-up period. There are only 3, and holding each for 15 seconds on each side should suffice. First, we have the warrior lunge hip flexor stretch. Mike is going to assume a lunge position with his front shin vertical and reach overhead. Notice that the torso remains upright and he doesn't hyperextend at the lumbar spine. The stretch is felt on the front of the trailing leg's hip, and you can increase the stretch a bit by rotating toward the front leg. Second, we have the prone IT band and tensor fascia lata stretch. Mike begins as if he was going to do a push-up, but instead bends one knee and brings his instep underneath him toward the opposite hip. The hips remain level and the knee is at the midline of the body. He then lowers himself to use his body weight to increase the stretch, which you'll feel on the lateral aspect of his thigh on the lead leg. Notice that his back remains flat throughout the duration of the stretch. Third, we have a double neck stretch. Mike is going to put his right hand behind his back as if he was being handcuffed, and then use his left hand to gently pull his head to the left. This will stretch out the lateral neck musculature on the right side. After a 15-second hold, he'll tuck his chin, look down towards his left foot, and gently pull the head in that direction with the left arm. This will stretch out the right side's posterior neck musculature. The secret with both of these stretches is to keep the shoulder blade pulled down.